and welcome to Bridging the Gap, BTG Pod. I'm Gabriel Martinez Cabrera, ED with LCMC, and my guest, my friend here, my co-host.
And I'm Anthony Featherstone, Executive Director for WorkSource Montgomery and Montgomery County's local workforce development board. And like we say every show, but I really mean it today, like we always do. We have a special guest that we're going to be talking to about bridging the gap, hospitality and hotel management style. We have Mr. Thomas Penny with us, the president of Donahoe Hospitality. How are you, sir?
Outstanding. Thank you for the invitation.
Good. No, thank you for joining us and giving us some of your time. So, I guess we'll just kick it off and get right into it. I know a little bit about your story, Thomas, and I think it's one of the I think more inspirational stories that I've heard. Of somebody at your level. But tell us about your journey. Tell us about what you do and your journey from where you started to being president of Donahoe Hospitality.
So let me just say, the Creator is more generous than we deserve. I started working in the industry. My first year in it, I took a job at a hotel, 151-room hotel as a dishwasher, making $4.25 an hour. And my parents always required that we work. And I got my first job when I was 13. I forged my birth certificate. So this is about my second or third job in by the time I'm 17. And so I took this job with the thought that I'd graduate high school, start college and maybe transition into something different. Well, just like many of the folks that you both work with, things happen that change our course. And for me, on a night where I was out celebrating my 18th birthday, my only brother, 2 years my senior, extended the invitation for me to come out. He was expressing how proud he was of me because I'd graduated high school, started college. We had gotten into some trouble as young kids that didn't always listen to our parents, and that led to him being put out of school and having to transition to Job Corps. So me graduating and starting college was a big deal, and he wanted to let me know about it. And to make a long story short, that night, he actually was killed in a car accident. And he was the closest person to me on the planet. We went through school together, with him being a few years older, and just did everything together. And it was the darkest day of my life. And I remember, a few days after we had gotten the news and we were preparing for his funeral, and my father said, "Son, I need you to deliver remarks at his funeral because I don't want to pay a pastor to tell lies about him." And so I remember at 18 years old walking in and seeing his gray casket at the front of the funeral home. And all I could do was kneel down next to it and say everything I do going forward was to make him proud. And I challenged everybody who was there to go back and get their education, take care of their families, and do better as a tribute to my brother's legacy. And so 2 weeks after the funeral, I went back to work on fire for living with a higher purpose. Over the next 18 months, I went from washing dishes basically to the second highest position at my first hotel. I was the food and beverage director, responsible for running a nightclub in the hotel when I couldn't even consume alcohol myself. I had a restaurant and 4,000 square feet of event space of which I was running. And I was, again, 19 and a half. I did that job for about 18 months, put my best suit on and came downtown to a 536-room hotel. It was a Donahoe hotel, and applied, and they hired me as a food and beverage manager. And I managed hotels for Donahoe for about 21 years. And back in 2017, we decided we were going to sell the hotel, Marriott downtown, that I was running. And so I said, maybe this affords me an opportunity to consider something different. And so I, cleaned up my resume, put it out there, and was offered an opportunity at another organization. But the Donahoe folks would not take my resignation. To make a long story short, they offered me the job as president of the hotel company. And for the past 5.5 years, I've been running the hotel company. And over the past 3 years through this pandemic, we've had the opportunity to add 6 hotels to our portfolio. Again, during the pandemic, we added a hotel in Vegas, a hotel in Baltimore in the Harbor Point section of Baltimore. We added a hotel in Reston, a hotel in DC by Audi Field. We took over another hotel in DC. And so we grew our portfolio by 30% in the pandemic. And in terms of that period of time, that's been the largest growth in the history of our organization. To add 6 hotels in a short window of time. It was really about 18 months. And so today I've been working on obviously bringing our industry back to life, growing our talent, making sure our senior leadership team looks like the community of which we're in. And so it's been a great run. But it all started with my brother's untimely passing and a commitment I made at his funeral.
So, I appreciate, we appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I had heard bits of the professional journey, but I didn't know the personal attachment to your professional journey. And I'm sorry to hear about your brother, and I'm happy to hear that you've turned it into a legacy that's led you to where you are right now. People call me naive. I have this crazy belief that everybody that we serve has the ability to be the next Jeff Bezos, the next Thomas Penny, and so forth. And I always tell our staff and our partners that if you don't believe in those that we serve, sometimes more than they believe in themselves, you may need to look at the business or industry that you're in to see if it's the right fit. So we work with a lot of people on the adult education and the workforce development side that have a lot of barriers and don't necessarily have, a skill set to match the level of barriers that they have. But, we want to help them out on that journey. What would you say to somebody starting out in your industry, given a few nuggets on this is what it takes for you to embark on this career path and get to whatever the top is for you in the hotel management and hospitality industry?
So the first thing I would just say is a relentless commitment to learning. When you come into a hotel, you have an opportunity to learn a lot of different jobs. And I say that our folks get a chance to earn 2 paychecks, the one that we pay them cash, but the other one is the opportunity to learn. And not everybody cashes that second check. And so as soon as you master your current role, be very assertive in asking to be cross-trained into the next job. We also have hotels everywhere. This is the hotel capital of the world. Here in Montgomery County with Marriott here, Choice here, Hilton right across the bridge in Virginia, 5 of the largest hotel REITs in the world right here in Montgomery County. And so we have basically a large hotel presence. And so take advantage of the opportunity to just walk through and experience different hotels and just learn from just being exposed to the various brands that are available to you. And then the last thing I just would say is, never get content with what you have. Sometimes we get a job and we start to make a few more dollars and we start to live slightly better. We get content, we get comfortable. And I think a key to my experience in this business is I still feel like I'm that dishwasher making $4.25 an hour. I still get up 4 o'clock every morning. I'm in the office by 5:30, 5:45. And everything is about just feeling that I still have something to prove. And so I just think that that's really, really important, a commitment to learning and just, an appetite to continue to grow and do more than you're doing today.
Do you think, especially with COVID, I know from the outside, we'd heard, that at least here in Montgomery County, we had heard that hiring was shrinking, especially entry-level jobs. They were kind of not going away, but you might be maybe for janitorial, there were companies that were hiring secondary companies, contractors for those kinds of lower entry jobs that just didn't want to take the overhead, or was it just cheaper or easier? And I guess I'm just kind of curious if, I know that you feel the way you do, but do you feel like that, is that sector wide that you feel like, because I remember I saw you speak about 8 years ago in like some kind of symposium about hospitality folks in DC, and you were doing it for a number of us who were in adult ed. And I remember that people on your panel were employees of yours specifically. And I remember you always stick out in my head because I remember you had told a portion of your story, and your staff who were under you, who had risen, and like the people under you like didn't even have GEDs when they first started, but they worked and they were allowed to grow, and you gave them opportunity. And so I guess I'm just curious, and I don't need you to badmouth, but are other companies in the sector is open to that idea of, if someone's coming and they're willing to put the work in and they want to learn, does that world allow them to do it regardless of what their educational background, where they came from, all that stuff? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are, what you've seen, and has that changed now with COVID?
So excellent question. And I'm glad I'll get a chance to make this point that I always like to make. The past 2 to 3 years with COVID has been a perfect storm of events. One, folks who were in the winter years of their career, and I'm talking about for folks who might be considering coming into our industry. One, the folks who might be in the winter years of their career, many of them have decided not to come back to work. And so now we have more job vacancies than at any point in my 30-year history of being in the business. There are more vacancies going unfilled today than at any point, again, by a large margin, any point in my 30-year career in the business. Secondarily, while America was at home with nothing to do, George Floyd and that experience of seeing it, experiencing it, feeling it, has challenged the conscience of some folks of goodwill throughout our country, and folks within our business specifically, right? So between a lot of vacancies in George Floyd, folks who may come from where I come from, there are going to be opportunities today, unlike any time in the history of me being in the business. Folks are open to returning citizens. They're open to folks with no high school education. They're open to refugees. They're basically looking to get talent wherever it exists in a way that I've never seen before. And so that is a direct response to this unique kind of moment in time. Now, I just think that for folks who are considering our business, it's important that you recognize that we're in a window of time. And at some point, that window will close. And to the extent that these positions go unfulfilled, it's going to invite some other decisions that business will have to make if they can't find talent. And my hope is that, the folks that you all have the benefit of working with, that they will jump into the industry, not just come in it, but jump into it. Because wages have gone up probably 20% in the last 3 years as we've been, scratching to find talent. And there's all these accelerated tracks that never existed. It took me 16 years to get my first GM job, and now folks can be on an accelerated track pretty quickly. And so the timing is right for folks to not only come into the business, but to run fast in it. And so, crisis creates opportunity, and I hope folks take advantage of it.
Well, so that was a good point. We have a job center inside of our correctional facility, and it's a dual track program, meaning you're working with us behind the walls, and when you get out, you come directly to our staff at the American Job Center, and you just continue the work, you continue to get that support. So if it's okay, I'm going to show this clip to the folks that we work with at the MCCF, because we always preach it all the time about there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunity in hospitality. So I was happy to hear you say that. I was looking at a little bit of data about your industry, and one thing that struck me was that less than 5%, and data is always debatable because of your source and how you disaggregate it and so forth. But the one report I pulled said that less than 5% of the workforce was between 19 and 24 years old. So for me, I looked at that as an opportunity. What are we doing with our young adult programs to get them excited, to make them aware of the opportunities that you spoke about? So I'm just curious to hear, are you seeing that dynamic within your organization, and not a lot of 18, 19 to 24-year-olds getting into the pipeline? Are you seeing that? And like, what do you see the opportunities?
So what I would say in our organization, I'm seeing a different trend, but it's because there's intentionality. We started Hospitality High School in Washington, D.C. back in the late 90s, and then transitioned our school into a partnership with DC Public Schools, where we today have 5 hospitality academies where we're teaching high school students about the hotel business from operations to ownership. And because of our engagement in that, we have access to young people who we have known for a long time who are looking to transition either straight from high school to work or from college to work. So we've seen a different trend because of the efforts that we've made. But I would say that by and large, that probably is true. And I'd say it's a joint challenge. Some 19 and 24-year-olds are staying at home longer and they're not getting connected to work, or they're opting for Uber or some other things that create some flexibility for them. But I would also say our industry has not done a good job of marketing to this generation of young people. And so our industry just does not have the best image. And so right now, organizations, I'm on the board of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, and we're deploying resources against creating an image of our industry being vibrant, open, not only open, but really wanting to bring in the next generation. And again, it took COVID to get us to do what we should have done 40 years ago. And so I'd say, yes, it's true, but there's some efforts to change it. And it's coming much because of necessity with these vacancies.
What are the positions like? What do you? I know you said the more general sense of like a real interest in learning. I think that's great. But it's like, what is are there any like minimal skill sets that, because you said, okay, you're open to all these different populations, and that sounds fantastic. What should someone, let's say, looking at from the outside, like the people that we're talking about, returning citizens, or we deal with a lot of refugees, immigrants. What are some skills that they could at least start, they need to have to even apply? Like, what are you guys looking for? And I know that you're not necessarily on the HR level looking to hire right now. You're a little bit higher up than that, but I'm sure that you kind of have a sense.
So clearly, we're going to need some folks that have some soft skills and a desire to work well with others. We're going to need folks that can resolve conflict without getting physical. We're going to need folks that are receptive to working in a culturally diverse environment. We're going to need folks that I'd say one of the biggest challenges for folks that have not worked in the last 2 to 3 years, it's very difficult to go from the couch to standing or walking 8 to 10 hours a day. That's a difficult transition. So folks got to be ready to make the transition back to work from being at home 2 or 3 years if they've been at home. But those are some of the core things that I think that are really, really important. But for me, in addition to those core things, again, I just can't underscore enough, really somebody who wants it. And whether you have a PhD or no D, there are PhDs that don't want it, and there are folks with no Ds that do want it, right? Yeah. And so a burning desire to live a different life, to improve the condition of your family is like really, really important. And if you have that burning desire to learn, to grow, and you bring that fire with you to the interview, even if you don't have some of the other core skills, we can build on just the desire itself, and we can work through some of the things that you might not have. But I call it. and everybody doesn't have it, and education doesn't equate to it.
Right.
And I actually think that folks that have multiple challenges or barriers, they're uniquely positioned for this moment in time, because some people, the pandemic has caused for them to back away from the table. They're overwhelmed by this moment. They're stressed by this moment. But, when the pandemic hit, I was out of the office for 2 weeks. I was back in the office, coming into a dark office, because I've experienced hardship every day of my life. I've experienced challenge every day of my life. And so right now, those that are comfortable working in turbulent times, they have additional value today. And so, the folks that might have some barriers, they need to understand that they also have some assets that are right for this time. And we have to make certain that they understand and see their own value.
So one of the things we noticed, and you did a little bit of research, you're on the AHLA, American Hotel and Lodging Association board. You mentioned that. And I know that you also serve on the Workforce Development Board in Baltimore City, and the Workforce Investment Council in DC as well, in which those are volunteer things, and you're running a company at that. So why is that important to you? And then if you've seen something creative in the hospitality industry on like bridging that gap for the folks that we serve, adult learners, folks that are below the poverty line, and so forth. If you can talk a little bit about that. So why is being on all those boards so important, especially the workforce boards, because I'm biased to workforce boards, of course. And have you seen anything creative? You mentioned a couple things with the hospitality institutions and so forth, but just interested if there's anything else that you've seen that could be scaled across the region or across the country for that matter.
So what I would say is, my father, and I should say first that my great-grandfather was born in 1898. He came up from North Carolina and resided in Berry Farms in the 1950s, worked on the construction site of the Twin Bridges Marriott, the first Marriott Hotel, and then later went to work inside the hotel. And so my great-grandfather was the first person in our family to kind of come into the hotel business. So I'm building on his legacy. But more than that, my father always would tell me as a kid, son, it doesn't matter how much you have in your yard. If your neighbor doesn't have enough in his, the struggle continues. And so to me, the greatest threat to the prosperity of our region is unemployment and folks not seeing themselves in that prosperity. It is the greatest threat. And so those of us who are in the business space, we can be a part of the solution or a part of the problem, but we can't talk about crime if we're not engaged in trying to help folks get connected to jobs. And so, my father really planted the seed, and my mother around doing for other people. And then in terms of some of the transformational things that I think that are happening, I'm really excited about the Hospitality Academy we have at Ballou and the NAF Academy network that we have across the country. And there are NAF academies in major cities throughout the country. And the reason why I'm excited, based on my direct experience here in DC, taking a group of folks who come from areas like Southeast DC and putting them in front of young people such that young people can draw confidence and experience from them, and then creating internships and jobs and having them to be able to call you when they're experiencing things in the workplace. And then when you are doing things in the industry, they're connected, they're seeing you, they're seeing themselves. Clearly, I'm excited about that. And then from a university perspective, I'm really excited about the development of the Marriott Sorensen Center at Howard University. I've been involved with that for the last 2 years. And the whole purpose of this program is to allow for Howard University School of Business graduates to be able to get on an accelerated track such that they can get into executive level and ownership positions within our industry. And I think that's really important work. And I'm really, really excited to see Marriott invest $20 million in it. and see the rest of the industry raise an additional 6 million to do something that will benefit folks that come from where I come from, who, who've not historically had opportunities. So I would say the NAF Academy network, both in terms of curriculum, internships, and then folks of color that look like them, that come from where they come from, spending time with them, and then the work that's being done in Howard are probably two of the things that I'm most excited about.
So I'm gonna betray so Anthony and I both, workforce development, I'm adult ed, so I'm gonna now betray my sympathies for adult ed, although, we all work together, it's all part of the same continuum. But I as adult ed people, we think about training and education, obviously. And so I'd love to hear someone who's in business say that one of the things they value most is a love of learning, right? That is music to my ears. But I am curious though, if you've got any advice for folks like me who run these programs. For me, when I see we're doing a lot of work around, let's say, IT training for like ESL and GED students, because I don't think enough people, like you said, help them see for themselves this future, right? But one thing I do see, especially with my, and I'm just going to be explicit here, especially with my Latino students, I think sometimes a lot of programs will say, hospitality, and they're just thinking like maid service, and then they kind of do some slapdash silly thing where they teach soft skills for like whatever that means, because that could be amorphous, right? I know it sounds kind of pointed, but I'm just going to be, but it hurts me a little bit because I'm like, first of all, it sets that. I don't think when people think hospitality, they don't think that there's a place where people could grow, even if they start at the bottom, right? So like you had this experience where you were like doing quote unquote that very entry level gig of dishwashing, and you rose, right? You worked through a channel, you found, you had that opportunity. I guess I'm just wondering, like, what could we do as educators to really provide our students with something more substantive than teaching a few soft skills and then throwing them in the space and saying, I guess my curious, what ends up happening, and this is maybe more about me thinking through it, but sometimes I think, if I'm just being honest about it, we used to do a hospitality program and I just pulled it because I was like, there's almost like a stereotype. It's like we had a lot of Latino students and they were going to do entry-level gigs at either a restaurant or in hotels, and then it felt like that's just where they're going to end, right? And I felt like we were just adding to the stereotypes almost by like, I'm training a bunch of Latino students to go and do that work that no one else wants to do, and I just kind of pulled back from it. I didn't want it. It just irritated me. And I guess I'm just kind of curious, like, I know I'm not alone. I might be more sensitive to it because I'm Latino myself, but I guess I'm just curious, what would you say to that? Like, how do you say no?
So first, I would say our industry has not done a good job, and that's why people feel the way they feel about the industry. But I also think that it's important, right, for you to get, like, if you were going to go in that direction again, I would want to connect some of our Latino leaders, our general managers, our corporate folks, and get them connected. And hell, I would want to be a part of it, right? Because again, it's extremely important that they see themselves at a higher level and that we let them know that it's possible. But if you're just training them based on what they've heard from family members, that's what it's going to be. And you need some folks that are doing maybe some of the things that they want to do in the future, saying, nah, that's the floor, that's not the ceiling.
Right.
Yeah. And so I would say it's imperative to have, I would call it a board, advisory board of folks that are serious about it, that are committed to it, that can basically create some unique opportunities for them to see themselves far beyond just the entry level. If you don't do that, the probability that that's going to be where they finish is high.
Right.
And if you look at our senior leadership chart on our website, right, it's not all Black, it's not all white, it's not all anything, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's necessary, right? And we have some Latino leaders that are not even reflected there, but are in our organization that are really being challenged, if you will, to continue to help us to be more diverse as it relates to that population. So if you were willing to consider it at any point in the future, I really would like to work with you. Now, I would also share with you a challenge that I'm having, right? Because even when I was in my 20s, I was really engaged in helping folks get connected. But even my 28 to, I would call it the 28 to 40-year-old leaders, they're not naturally as engaged as I was. And so I'm putting it as a part of their leadership development plan that they have to be, right? Because I want people that are committed to doing good and doing well. But some of the younger folks just are not naturally, I guess, hardwired to really just automatically get interested in helping in the way that that I was some years ago. And that's not, I'm saying across racial and cultural lines, that's true. It's not just one group. And there's some exceptions to that. And but I also think that there's a quote that says each generation has to document its times, because while future generations will make mistakes, the hopes is that they'll make mistakes at a higher level. And so it's my job, it's our job to make sure that folks that are coming behind us understand their responsibility.
And so, one of the things I'm excited about, and Thomas, I'm sure you know about this. Maryland has a blueprint for success that's supposed to change the landscape of how the public education system works in Maryland. And a part of that is career counseling that every public school student is going to start getting at 6th grade. And I can just speak for myself on this one. I think it's big, and I think it's something that I would have wanted in the 6th grade all the way through the 12th grades to figure out kind of what's here and there, like what are the opportunities that I could possibly jump into, because when you don't know, you don't know. So I think that's a big opportunity for Maryland as a whole. And this is less of a question, more of a comment. I'd love to work with you moving forward as we start to implement that legislation to make sure that we're on the right track and kind of busting those myths that we're talking about, that this is the end all be all in hospitality, when it's so much more. And I just think that starting early, the 6th grade is doing fun stuff, learning about the industry. You can't get too nitty gritty with the 6th grade, I don't think, but you can build to the 12th grade so they're fully aware of like all of the opportunities. I think that's going to pay a lot of dividends for just the talent pipeline long term, not necessarily short term, but I'm excited about that. So when time comes out, I'll ring your phone so you can be a part of that.
The one thing I think we also got to do a good job, and or I'd say a better job, and I experienced this with some of our high schools. Some of our educators can get, they're so deep in education that they lose the inspiration, and it becomes more work versus the responsibility that they have. And so as those career counselors are added, I think it's important that we have some way to continue to keep them focused on what they're going to be there to do. And it may take some business folks being engaged and some community folks being engaged to make sure that they continue to stay focused on the role of really lighting a fire in the dreams and hopes of young people.
I agree.
So I guess I want to respect time, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate time spent. I don't know, Anthony, do you want to do a follow-up?
No, I'm good to go.
I think, it sounds to me, you give us some real food for thought. And I think that piece, because, the audience for Bridging the Gap for this podcast is made up of people who do the work that we do, right? It's either adult ed or workforce development, or people who kind of stand a little bit on both camps. And I think you really gave some food for thought about how we go forward. Because I do think sometimes, like we're funded by Department of Labor and they'll say, it's great, get these people in hospitality jobs. And then you're like, yeah, but that's not even a living wage, or it's kind of low, or is there room for growth? So I love your idea about getting engaged with business people at the level of education, right? Like, so it's not just we're just educating people and then we try to send them to you and maybe you hire them. It seems like there's a real way to do that. And it sounds like you've done that in DC. So and I think if I remember right, you were kind of at the start of a lot of that work in DC. So what would you tell like an educator, like who's working in another municipality, may not, maybe this doesn't exist for them already. How would you, if you were a business person in that municipality, how would you want to be engaged? What would the ask be? And what would be something that would be appealing to you as a business person in hospitality from a school, an adult ed agency, or from a workforce development group in those municipalities? What would your suggestion be? How do we approach you?
Well, I'm a true believer that most people in business are just about business. And so I would say to speak to the unique opportunity you have to help fill this staffing need. Again, this is a unique moment in time that we just got to take advantage of. And I think leveraging the resources that educator might have, and also just showing a deep degree of commitment to doing the work at a high level is going to be important. I also think that it's important for them to reach out to folks that might be doing it, such that they don't recreate the wheel and they can maybe start on higher ground. But for me personally, it's just all about hearing about the need within the community, and then just trying to respond to that. And I think every community has its fair share of true believers. I think getting connected to true believers are important because they're like evangelists. They can bring others in a unique way. And so if you get one of them, they can bring 10, they can bring 20. But it's just about getting those one or two folks engaged. And they're folks that understand that, we can send folks to work, or we can send them to the cemetery. We can send folks to work, or we can send them to prison, right? We can send folks to work, or we're going to have crime that's going to threaten our ability to do business. And so, when I'm thinking about the future of developing hotels, I need safe communities. I need people making living wage. I need people having access to benefits, because to the extent that they can take good care of their family and they have something to lose, they're going to make different decisions. And so I have a responsibility, just as well as educators have a responsibility, and other members of the community. And, we either work together or things will get worse before they get better.
So this has been good. I'm sure we could all just continue on, but as Gabe said, we want to respect your time, and I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much again for carving out time and educating us, really, and our listeners on the opportunities that are available in the hospitality industry. And I think we did a little bit of myth busting as well, which was is always the intent. But
I also want to say, you all, I've learned a lot about Montgomery County since I've been in this office, right? Growing up in DC, we never came to Montgomery County. We never thought Montgomery County had any needs. And if anybody was doing any volunteer work or doing anything in Montgomery County, we just thought that that's where folks that had a lot of resources were, right? But I've learned that that's not the case, and there are folks that need help here just like everywhere else.
Yeah. So we've got a similar vantage point. I didn't think there were any folks that were on the have-not end of the spectrum, growing up in DC as well. But, I think, that's part of our task. There are a lot of folks in Montgomery County that they have all the potential in the world. They may just need a little help, a little support, and that's what we're here to do. And I think that's what companies like Donahoe, Hospitality, and you are, helping us do as well. So, this has been great. So, we really appreciate it. And, from Gabe and myself, thank you again. Thomas Penny, president of Donahoe Hospitality, came through and, helped us out with bridging the gap hospitality style. So, I want to thank all of our listeners, and, we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.